Hi, and welcome to Emmanuel Kids. It's good to be back with you again this week. You know, today's lesson that we're hearing in church is all about people who are meeting Jesus really for the first time. Jesus teaches them, and then Jesus does a wonderful miracle, healing someone right in front of them. And what we're told is that all the people were amazed. They were amazed at what Jesus was teaching. They were amazed at what they saw. They were amazed. What do you think it means to be amazed? I think it means to be surprised. I think it means to see something for the first time and just go, wow, I can't believe that. That is so incredible. So today, I wanted to share with you something that always amazes me, and that is baking bread. You know, bread is one of those things that we kind of take for granted. If you eat sandwiches, yeah, the bread's kind of there. If you have bread with dinner, it's there. But, you know, making bread is such a fun thing. And what is amazing to me is that it just takes a few things. It takes flour, just plain old ordinary flour. I use bread flour, but you don't need to. It's just any kind of flour. It takes water. It takes a little bit of honey. I've got some honey here. And it takes salt. Now, if I mix those things together, I would get kind of like a mushy-gushy kind of thing that I could stick my fingers in and play with. But what makes bread is amazing. These things all go together and they're all good ingredients. But the ingredient that makes bread absolutely amazing is yeast. Yeast comes in little packets like this, or it comes in a jar. And yeast is something that we put in the bread, and that's what makes it light. It's what makes it rise. It's what makes it, well, that wonderful, gushy, squishy, wonderful bread that you can bite into and just taste so amazing. Yeast, my mom used to tell me, is alive. And I always kind of waited to look at it and think it would crawl out of the bowl, but it's not that kind of alive. It's alive like a plant is alive. And so when we make bread, we need to have this yeast because that's what combines with all of these things and makes it rise up and makes it light and airy and delicious. So I'm going to show you how to make bread today. I've already mixed together 1 1/4 cups of water. I used 1 envelope of yeast, and I mixed together 2 teaspoons of salt and 1 tablespoon of honey. And I take that back. I didn't put the salt in yet. That comes later. So it's just honey, water, and yeast. Sorry about that. I've always wanted to do a cooking show, and I don't know, I think it's harder than what it looks. But anyway, you mix that all together. And then you let the yeast kind of dissolve in the water, and then you let it sit for a bit. I've already mixed it together, and it looks like this. It gets a little bit foamy, and that tells me that that yeast is ready to work. It's ready to go to town. Now we add the salt to 3 1/2 cups of flour. And I took that salt and I just mixed it into the flour. So now what we're going to do, after you let this sit a little bit so that the yeast dissolves and it's all really good, we're going to add the flour, maybe a little bit at a time, maybe about a cup or so at a time. And you start out by mixing it in until it's nice and smooth. You just keep mixing it together until that flour is all together with the yeast and the water and the honey and all of those kinds of things. And it's going to be kind of watery, and you look, how is this going to be bread? But the more flour you add, the more it's going to look like dough. And then we're going to do something really fun with this dough, because what's really important is to work with this dough so that it all mixes together, and it mixes really, really well. So we're going to do something called kneading the dough, and I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit. But you just keep adding the flour in, mixing it little by little, and it's going to get stiffer and stiffer and harder to stir as you keep going. But remember, this is just flour, water, salt, yeast, and a little bit of honey. That's it. And this is going to make just incredible, incredible bread. So keep doing it. We're getting to that point where it's getting harder to mix it together, and it really is beginning to look like dough. It actually smells pretty good too. So keep adding that flour. And now's when it gets really fun, because guess what? It's getting too mushy to do with a spoon. So now I get to use my hands, and that's really fun. When I do it, I usually keep it in the dish for now, and I just kind of mush it together with my hands. And I just mess up one hand so that I can use this hand to keep doing the flour, to keep adding flour to it the whole time. Now, bread is one of those things that people who really know how to bake bread well, they know how much flour to add, and it really depends on what the day is like. If it's hot, or if it's humid, if it's dry, if it's muggy, if it's raining, if it's nice, it all affects the bread with the amount of moisture. So some days you might need more flour than others. It looks like today I may not need quite as much flour. We'll have to see as I work on this. So you just keep making it together, and it becomes a dough, and it's kind of ugly looking. I don't know if you can see this. It's not very pretty, but it's going to get pretty. I'm going to put in just a little bit more flour and mix that together. And I think it's ready to start kneading. This is my favorite part of baking bread. And kneading is when you take this and you mix it all together. So it's going to get soft and it's going to get really good. You take a little bit extra flour and you just kind of put it out on the counter, or if you have a wooden board or wherever you're going to knead, and then you just take your bread, your dough, and put it out on this thing. Now you get to use both hands. And when you knead, you basically just take it like this, fold it, and with this part of your hand, with what they call the heel of your hand, right there in the palm, you push it down. And you do this for a very long time. You might do it for, it might take you 3-4 minutes. It might take 10 minutes. I've made some bread recipes that tell you to knead for 12 minutes. That's a lot of kneading. But you just keep doing this. Keep at it. And the more you knead it, the softer and the squishier it will get. It's going to start to feel like elastic. It's going to stretch and then pop back the more you do this. And that's what makes the bread so delicious. So you just keep kneading until it's really, really, really smooth. And this is where you can kind of take turns. You can take turns with your parents, or if you have a brother or sister, or someone else that you want to take turns with. Take turns kneading and feel what that bread feels like. It just begins to feel so soft and so beautiful as it combines together. So I'm going to do some kneading, and I'll be back with you in a few minutes. You know what? My bread is just about ready to go. The dough has been kneaded. And remember how shaggy and goopy it looked before? Now it's really, really smooth. Can you see that? It's soft, it's moist, but it's not sticky at all. It just feels so good. It just feels like it's all ready. And if you look at it, I can stretch it and it's gonna pop right back into place. Yeah, so I think my bread is just about ready, because now we're not going to eat it yet. It's still going to take another hour or maybe even 2 until we get to eat it. Bread takes a long time to make. You know, back before there was bread in supermarkets, people would spend all day long baking bread. You might have even had grandparents who made their own bread, and they would work on it all day long. But you know, the cool thing about bread is that people all over the world eat bread. They eat different kinds. You know, in Mexico, people eat tortillas. We eat loaves of bread, or we eat flatbread, or we eat English muffins or buns. You know, if you think about it, all the different kinds of bread there are. It's kind of amazing. We're going to make tiny little flat loaves. So once your bread is really smooth and elastic and it feels real good and it's popping back, we're going to take it and we're going to break it into 8 pieces. Now, you just kind of take it and twist it and pull it apart. And so we're going to make 8 pieces out of it. And you can do that pretty quickly. And then each one of these 8 pieces, we're going to pat into a flat little loaf. So you're going to take it and you're just going to mush it down. You can pull it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can just pat it with the heel of your hand. If you really want to, you can use a rolling pin, but I just like to do it with my hand. And you stretch it until you have it, maybe about, I don't know if you can see, maybe about 1/4 inch thick, something like that. And you just pat it down and keep working with it. And then you put it on a baking sheet. Now, if you have a baking sheet, like a cookie sheet, you can just brush it with a little bit of olive oil. But I like to use parchment paper because then we don't have to use as much oil. And I think it comes out really nice. So you just take it, you put it on your sheet like this. And you do this with all 8 pieces. And when you're finished with it, when you have all 8 pieces nice and flat, you're going to take them, you can take a little bit of olive oil, just plain old olive oil, nothing fancy. And if you don't have olive oil, you can use canola oil or vegetable oil, anything like that. And you're just going to take a little bit and you're just going to brush the tops of it. Let me move this over here so you can see what I'm doing. Move my other little loaves out of the way. Just going to brush some olive oil on the top. If you want to get really fancy, you can take different herbs or you can take a little bit of salt. I have a little bit of salt here. You can just put a little bit of salt on top. If you just a tiny, tiny touch, if you want to do something fancy, you can take basil, which is supposed to be in here and I can't find. But, oh, there it is. You can take basil and just sprinkle a little basil on top. Or oregano. Or you can ask your parents what herb might be really good on top of here. Or you can leave it just plain. But you do this with all 8 loaves, with all 8 rounds. Then you take, oops, where did I put my towel? Here it is. You take a towel, I'm coming, I promise. You wet it, just so it's a little bit damp. And then you just take it and you cover these loaves. And you sit it someplace out of the way, someplace where it's warm, someplace where there's no draft, someplace where you can kind of forget about it for about an hour and just let it sit there. And that's when it is just amazing, because that's when the yeast does its magic, because these are going to rise and they'll get about twice their size. Maybe they were about that thick, they're going to get to be about that thick. And you just let them go and they're going to rise up. And when they're just doubled in size, then it's time to bake them. And that's really exciting. You know, we use bread for meals. We use it for sandwiches. We eat bread all the time. But one of the times we use bread in the church is for communion. Next Sunday, we're going to be celebrating communion together online. And maybe you could make some bread for that service. That would be kind of cool. Or you can just make it for your family to enjoy, because it's just such an amazing thing. The thing about bread that is so cool is that, you know, we watch this happen and it feels almost like magic. You know, some of the things that I find amazing are the fact that God loves us so very much. That God is with us everywhere. And, you know, we can see that. When I go outside and I see that, you know, it's a beautiful day, the sun is shining, I realize that that's kind of a gift from God for today. That God has made this wonderful, wonderful day for me to enjoy. When I go outside and I look at the trees, and they don't look like they're very much alive right now, but I know that they are, because in the spring, leaves are going to come back. They're going to sprout out. You know, the snow we had this weekend, I love snow, so I was pretty excited about the snow. But I was also excited about the snow because I know that even snow is a gift from God. Because it's one way that God waters the earth and gives water so those trees and plants can spring up when springtime comes. You know, when I go out in the woods and I see, you know, all the footprints out there from, we have a fox that lives in our woods. When I see footprints from deer, when I see, you know, all these things, I realize how wonderful it is. And all these things that are living just in my backyard. And those are gifts from God. I look at my pets. You probably have seen them a few times on different, you know, Emmanuel Kid videos. And they're a gift from God too, because they're so wonderful. And I love them, but they love me back too. And they're just an amazing gift from God. My family is an amazing gift from God. You know, there's so many things to be amazed about that God has given us and God has done for us. And maybe that's why I like baking bread, because it reminds me of being amazed. So I'm going to finish this bread. I'm going to let it rise, and I'll see you in about an hour. Well, I'll see you in just a minute, but I'm going to let this rise for an hour, and then I'll be back and we'll bake this and see what it looks like. Okay? I'll be right back. Well, it's been about an hour now, and so I'm ready to look at my little tiny round loaves. They're puffy, they're bigger, they're ready to go. So now what we're going to do, you take that towel off of them, and now we're going to pop them in the oven. We're going to bake them at 450 degrees, which is pretty hot. But we're going to bake them at 450 for somewhere between 10 to 14 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. You have to kind of watch because everybody's oven is a little bit different. So what I would say, put them in for about 10 or 11 minutes and then check them. And if they look like they're nice and light brown and they've risen and everything, then they're done. But they may need to go a little bit longer. Maybe you can get some help from your parents just to know exactly when to take them out. So I'm going to go put these in the oven now, and I'll be back when they're all done. So my bread is all done. Here it is. I got 8 loaves, 8 tiny little loaves that we're going to have for dinner tonight. You know, this is such an amazing thing when you think that just as we've been together today, we took flour, water, salt, honey, and that special yeast and put it together, and we have bread. It took a little time, it took a little work, but here it is. And they're soft, and you see they're still warm, they're still hot, and it smells so incredible. You know what another thing about bread is that's amazing to me is that Jesus talked about bread a long time ago. Jesus said that he was the bread of life. He said that, in other words, he is so important for us. He wants to be that thing that we hold on to, that we follow, that we trust, that it's just like bread, that thing that we have every day. And Jesus wants us to remember him, to follow him every single day. Jesus took loaves and fish. He took 5 little loaves and 2 fish and fed 5,000 people. He sat down and ate bread with his disciples, and on the last night of his life, we're told that he took a loaf of bread. He broke it and he blessed it and gave it to all those around them, saying, "This is my body, which I'm giving for you." That's the story we tell in communion. So it's kind of amazing to me that this bread that we make today and the bread that we eat and all of these things are a connection to Jesus. It reminds us that there are amazing things in our lives every single day. I hope you'll try baking bread. It really is fun. And it's pretty amazing when you take it out of the oven and you realize, wow, I made this. This is pretty incredible. But I thank you for being with me and for hearing about all the amazing things that I see in the world, especially this amazing stuff of bread. Let's say a prayer together before we go, shall we? God, we thank you for all the things you give to us. We thank you for all the amazing things in our lives, for family and friends, for food, for our homes. We thank you for the beauty in this world. We thank you for the fun things we're able to experience. We thank you for the snow, for the sun, and our lists could go on and on. Help us always to be amazed that you are with us, coming to us, sharing with us, and loving us every single day of our lives. Amen. Thanks for being with me. Have a wonderful week.